All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out this morning. My name is Fabian, and I'm just going to give you a brief introduction. This is going to be Soybeans 101. It's a very new crop that has been introduced into southern Alberta recently. We've been raising them on our farm for the past 8 years. So we've had some experiences, we've had a lot of successes, we've had a few not so good successes. We've learned ways on how not to grow them. And so we're just going to give you a quick overview on these things today. Number one, they are not an early seeded crop. Soybeans are ones that need to be seeded into warm soil. So for your earlier seeded, higher value crops, go ahead, put those in, get those out of the way. They'll facilitate your time management because not everything needs to be done right at once. Keep these to the end of your seeding program. The rule of thumb that we like to see is 10 at 10. We like to see 10 degrees of soil temperature at 10 o'clock in the morning at your planting depth. That's our indicator that we know that it's time to go, and anytime from that point on, they can be planted in the ground. Soybeans, the varieties that we use are a photosensitive type variety. In other words, the ones that are planted on May the 10th or the ones that are planted on June the 1st will have about 3 to 4 days maturity difference between them. As they are seeded later and as the plant can detect that the nighttime length is getting longer, they'll actually tighten their maturity up to accommodate and facilitate maturity. The seeding rate on these things, it all depends on what your planting equipment is. You can use a variety of planting machinery to plant soybeans. You don't have to retool. If you have an air seeder, that will work. On some of them, we have better results than others. If you have old box drills like 7200s or 9450s, those work fine. If you have zero-till drills, that works fine. If you have a planter, that works fine. The thing we need to do with planters is we have to make sure, or with any of our seeding equipment, we need to have the ability to put two things in, the seed and granular inoculant. It's been our experience over the years that if we go with liquid inoculant by itself, or granular inoculant by itself, or a double rate of either of those by themselves, it will not give us the yield bump that we see consistently if we go with liquid inoculant on the seed and granular inoculant in the seed row. And I've got some samples here I'll hand around. The first one is just an example of no inoculant. There are no nodules on the plant itself. And Jamie was good enough to dig some out of the ground for me here. Is liquid inoculant by itself, and you'll see that there's nodules that are clustered right at the base of the plant. And the third one, I knocked off some of the nodules unfortunately, but you can see that in addition to having the nodules at the base of the plant, we also have them on the root hairs, on the branch roots as well. And that is the effect that we see consistently when we go with the double inoculant. So that's important. Planting depth, we want to keep them as shallow as possible. If we put them in too deep, they're not like peas, so we have to readjust our thinking a little bit. If they're going too deep, it's going to take too long for them to come out of the ground, and you will have a stand penalty as a result. After you're done seeding, we want to have them rock rolled with a land roller for the simple reason on soybeans, and this is characteristic with all varieties, they tend to pod low on the ground. And consequently, if you don't have flat land, you're going to be leaving some behind. If you look at the ridges that are here, if you can imagine a flex header going across, it's going to be leaving a bunch of the pods that are lower on the ground. By eliminating these ridges by rock rolling, we're able to flatten it down, and you'll be able to capture usually about 3 to 5 bushels per acre by that operation alone. So it's these little things that make a big difference along the way from making this crop barely be able to pay its way to being a profitable crop. First-time producers, we can, on pivots, irrigation, we typically tell them expect about 40 to 45 bushels to the acre. They'll, in just about every case, do better than that, but as a good rule of thumb, figure on 40 to 45 bushels. As far as price, what you can figure on, historically in this area, we've got more and more players coming into the market. We just had another line company announce that they're going to be taking soybeans this fall. We already have a processing facility locally here as well, and then 2 other line companies that have been purchasing them. You can figure on about $10 to $11 a bushel. Now, that seems like a fairly high penalty compared to when you look at the futures, but what we're actually dealing with right now, and hopefully that's going to change soon, is they factor in a price for us to rail them over to Manitoba, and they turn around, reorganize them, and they rail them right past here out to the coast. So as we can get to the logistics of where they're going to be able to put us into a freight positive situation, you'll see those numbers change. But for the time being, those are the numbers that we tell producers to kind of bank on. It's a fairly low input crop. We don't have to worry about being out there every second week with a herbicide or a fungicide or a insecticide. The weed management is easy on them. They're Roundup ready. You see weeds, hit them hard. They can tolerate extremely high rates of glyphosate. You should use the recommended rates of glyphosate, but I have seen fields successfully sprayed where the guy screwed up and put over 2 liters per acre on of the 540. And it works fine. They'll metabolize it through, you don't even see a difference. The pest problem with soybeans, at this point, we don't have them. If you take a look at the plant, it's got a hairy stem. It's like a cucumber. And the bugs really don't like them, so they'll bugger off and go chew on canola or something else that's a little easier to get at. So from the management point of view, in Manitoba they have soybean aphids. We don't have that problem out here. As far as spraying for fungicides, we have had a couple incidents of white mold developing, but we've been able to control that. Those were usually in closed rows, 7-inch row spacing, and lots of high water application. Canopy covered in, and there wasn't much aeration that was going on. So we were able to, in those cases there, the following years, plug off every second run, open it up to a 14 or a 16-inch row spacing, problem solved. So that's been our extent of fungus problems or anything of that sort. As far as harvesting goes on the soybeans, they are just like the planting. They're the last thing you're going to plant, probably be the last thing you harvest. If you have other crops that are higher value, ready to go at the same time, leave them. They're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to shell, and I used to say at all. Last year I had to change my story on that. You all know that we had that 117 km/h wind that came through here. We had a couple of our clients that had soybeans ready to go. And the one client lost about 18 bushels to the acre. The other one lost about 12 bushels to the acre. They were still able to harvest 34 to 38 bushels to the acre off of that. But it does, I can't say any longer that these things don't shell. But they have an extremely high shattering resistance. Down Medicine Hat Way, that same wind, it wasn't quite as heavy, 90 km/h. You'd have to look on the ground, walk around to find a pod or a seed on the ground. So it just gives you an idea that they are very, very robust. They won't lodge on you. They'll stand straight, so lodging isn't an issue. Touching on the marketing, going back to that just a second, they are, next to corn, they are the second most liquid traded commodity in North America. They're sold on the open market on the Chicago Exchange. For those of you that like to play with the futures, you can forward price them up to 3 years in advance. Straightforward as that goes. Very simple as far as marketing goes. Unlike marketing barley, where they want to know percent plump, they want to know bushel weight, their test weight, they want to know percent foreign material, and dockage, and the whole 9 yards. These guys want to know 2 things. What's your moisture content, and how many tons do you have? If you have any dockage levels that are over 2%, you better start asking your guy who's buying how he's grading. Because usually most of the companies don't even take a dockage off, or if it is, it's like a 0.5%. Because if you take your field peas, for example, split a field pea, that becomes dockage. With soybeans, split that soybean in half, that's not dockage. Split that soybean again, it's still not dockage. So if you got it into quarters, that's not considered dockage. Greens, they'll accept, depending on the companies, 3 to 5% greens. That hasn't been a problem. Last year, talking to the guys that were buying, each of them found maybe one field that they had to address it just a little bit, but most of them, it's not an issue. The varieties that we have in southern Alberta are, especially around here, have enough maturity to finish off completely, so we don't have to worry about the green issue. When you're selecting your soybeans, and the fields you want to go on, there's 3 things that I want you to keep in mind. Don't put soybeans on these 3 fields. Number 1, a field that has high levels of nitrogen. So if last fall you went out and put a bunch of fall applied fertilizer down, this spring plans change, you got 80 pounds of nitrogen in the soil and you want to put soybeans in, don't do it. These things perform best on low nitrogen levels. They require 300 pounds of nitrogen to fix a 50 bushel crop. That's a lot. 1 bushel, 6 pounds. So you can just do the math on that. And so obviously the 80 pounds isn't going to do it. But when they're double inoculated, they're going to fix enough nitrogen for you to be able to get that crop, plus leave enough behind for next year. On my 2 fields that we grew soybeans on last year, this is on wheel line, so I don't get the yields like you guys get. But projecting an 85 bushel hard wheat crop, my agronomist has suggested I have to put on 15 pounds of supplemental nitrogen to top off the program. For 60 bushel flax, I need 12 pounds of nitrogen supplemental. So these things kick a pile of nitrogen back in the soil. As far as first of all, does anybody have any questions?
Seed supply, bulk seed supply. Can you get anything other than mini bulk?
Yeah, most of the stuff is bulk.
Like truckload?
Truckload, absolutely. Mini bulks are a pain in the rear end. Yeah, that's my preference, is treating it onto the truck bulk. Absolutely, it's a lot easier to handle. We can do mini bulks. I'll sure try and talk you out of it though.
Yeah, we grew them a couple years, but the mini bulks is the only place we can get them.
Yeah, they're a little bit harder to handle, but for smaller batches, for those that want to try 30 acres or whatever, we'll accommodate it. So I don't want to try and dissuade anybody. When it comes to selecting your soybeans, make sure you're picking a variety that's suited for this area. Number 1, obviously heat units, but the other little things that aren't often noticed is the importance of a score we call IDC, or iron deficiency chlorosis. Some of the varieties are bred for Eastern Canadian, Eastern US conditions. They have a whole total different world out there. They have a low pH soil. They're dealing with acid soils out there. And what we have been seeing, if we introduce them into our high calcareous soils here with a high pH, we'll see them stall off about this high, and the leaves will kind of turn yellow along the veins. That's iron deficiency chlorosis. And what's happening is the calcium carbonates in our soil are tying up the iron, and the plant can't extract it. So it stalls off for about 10 days to 2 weeks. It should recover and grow out of it, but you're going to have a significant yield penalty as well as 2-week later maturity, especially if they're not photosensitive types. So those are some of the things to keep in mind when you're looking at choosing your soybean varieties. And other than that, the other 2 places you don't want to grow your soybeans, one was the high nitrogen field. The other one was on a field that has had Roundup Ready canola last year. That sounds like a no-brainer. But you'd be surprised how many people phone me up and go, oh crap, how do I? So there's ways of doing it, but you're going to be looking at another $30 an acre. And the final thing that you don't want to put soybeans into a field that had clopyralid in last year, Lawntrell. Because what will happen is the residual with our low organic matter soils, the residual of the clopyralid sticks around and it'll haunt your soybean crop. you're going to have a soybean crop that'll show up about double this height. And it's the yield, you're going to have a significant yield penalty as well. So those are the 3 suggestions. Do not, unless you got a tax problem, then go ahead. But generally, don't put those on your, put soybeans on those 3 fields. Other than that, is there any other questions? Seeding rate, depending on what you're seeding with. If we're going with a 14-inch spacing, I'll use mine for example. We have John Deere 9450 hoe drills. We duct tape off every second row, so we have a 14-inch seed row spacing. That's 180,000 plants per acre. This year, depending on the variety that we were seeding, we were either at 67 pounds to 74 pounds per acre. But that, we go by seeding plant density. And so, but to give you an idea what we're looking at, about 65 to 70 pounds, give or take, depending on seed size.
Dry land?
Dry land, down around this area here, south of here, guys have been growing them. We've had some clients growing them for the last 4 years. You can expect 25 to 32 bushels to the acre typically. Sometimes you'll get a little higher, but the lowest I think I've heard them say was 22 bushels on the one bad year. Incidentally, the year after that, they had durum in that field. They had an 8 bushel yield bump. They had canola the year before, beside the soybeans. Year 2, they had a 8 bushel bump of durum with a 0.9 protein bump on it. So that's what they're using it for, as a prep crop for their higher value crops the following year. Can you grow seed? No, these are Roundup ready, and as such, they are under the Roundup licensing agreement. So each producer that grows them has to have a TSA number, just like Roundup ready canola. But there are there are conventional varieties that you can keep your own seed for, yes. Any other questions?
So if you seeded canola after these, you'd have to use a Liberty or...
Yeah, typically these work well in a Liberty rotation. We can make it work with a canola that is Roundup ready, but you want to make sure you're 2-3 years out. And following the soybeans, you don't have to worry about volunteers. These things don't volunteer. They'll swell in the fall, they'll split over winter, and they're dead. In fact, you'd have a hard time walking in a field the next year trying to find any soybeans growing. Any other questions before we wrap it up? I'm getting an indication here from our facilitator that my time is up. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be around for a little bit.